This is the Senior Community Center Something to Talk About program, which is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers memory care and is constructing assisted living and independent living. They're accepting residents, and if you'd like to learn more, call 360-689-4314. We have a couple people joining us right now in the room. Come on over. I didn't know you were going to be here. I'm glad to have you here. With me is Ann Cook, who works with Bainbridge Prepares, and we're talking today about the Map Your Neighborhood program. So I have a few questions that I will ask you, Ann, and we'll get started, and then we'll be open to any questions you may have. So thanks for showing up online or in person, and we'll just scoot around a little bit so that you feel like we aren't
walking away.
We aren't ignoring you. So Ann, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about how you got first engaged in Bainbridge Prepares and preparedness on the island?
In 2008, I think Tom McCluskey or somebody like that gave a speech about how to be a prepared neighborhood. And we started getting names and phone numbers and trying to maintain a list of people that lived in the neighborhood. And it's been an ongoing process. Things have moved along exponentially since COVID, because I think that made emergencies much more real to people than they had been, along with the continuing research about earthquakes in this area.
Yeah, I know that this has long been known as an earthquake area, but maybe not in our consciousness. There's been a lot of work in the last few years that has changed that, right?
Yeah, there's been a tremendous amount of work. They did regional preparedness drill in 2016, that I think was the first multi-facility regional drill. They found out that we were dramatically unprepared. I mean, it was kind of abysmal. And of all the places in Kitsap County, we are in fact the most isolated place. You live on an island with a functionally obsolete bridge built in the 50s and a ferry system that needs to have its docks working.
Right.
And it doesn't take a lot to figure out that, nobody is going to reach us anytime soon. Seattle, yes, and on the island more in Winslow, but basically we need to be able to stay on our own. Used to be 2 or 3 days.
Yes, that's what I remember hearing.
Yeah. And
Try 2 weeks.
Then it went, now the state government has adopted 2 weeks ready, but on the island, we really prefer that you think 3 weeks and ideally at least a month.
Wow. That's a long time.
Yeah, yes.
When you start to think about things like water and food supplies. So when you look at that, that sounds daunting.
Well, it is daunting particularly if you try to think of everything all at one gulp, you'll just drive yourself crazy. You got to start incrementally. And the most important part really in what's called Map Your Neighborhood should be Meet Your Street, is meeting your neighbors. I mean, you've got to be able to know who they are and they need to know who you are. Like my backstory is I lived in Anchorage, Alaska the year after the earthquake, and the images of that city are still burned into my brain. And I had a number of experiences in Alaska that made me get prepared and gave me some close calls, and I knew people up there that didn't make it, but every time I left my house in a car, I had a sleeping bag, I had chains, I had kitty litter, I had all kinds of stuff, plus food, water, and it's just a really different environment. But the things that you worry about up there, you should worry about down here too.
So that idea of thinking about always sort of having a go bag, having some material with you is something that you continue to do.
Oh, yeah, I totally embrace it. I joke that should there be an emergency, I won't know which bag to get. I'll have several dangling off me. I've got an emergency bag in my car 100% of the time. I have a medical equipment bag. I have my Citizens Emergency Response Team bag. I have the 2 to 3 days evacuate instantly bag in my front hall for my husband and I. And, I'm just, if anything, I'm probably a little nutso on the side.
Well, I'd like to know if you were on my street where you were. So I think that's motivation to talk to my neighbors. So the Map Your Neighborhood program has been going on for a while. I think I first participated in a discussion maybe 6 years ago, when it was first getting introduced. How many neighborhoods or how widely is it been embraced at least once over on the island?
Well, at least once over, probably 42%. We've already done more kickoff meetings this year than we did all of last year.
Oh, wow.
We actually have done twice as many. I mean, the pandemic is over, at least in people's minds. I still wear masks a lot, but the weather is good. A lot of neighborhoods are realizing that they've had like a 3-year period of hiatus and haven't done anything. And the weather is nice, so if you want to get outside, it's a much better environment. And
You mean to have a get together?
to have a get together outside.
So what happens at a Map Your Neighborhood meeting if you haven't had one or been to one?
Well, the first thing you should do probably is find out if your neighborhood is mapped. And I can be emailed and let you know that. And my email is Ann Cook, no E's, extra E's anywhere, all one word, at bainbridgeprepares.org. And I get all kinds of emails constantly, and I actually pretty much get back to everybody the same day, but I would need to know where your address is, if you're aware of ever having been mapped, if you remember the name of the street captain. If you don't know any of those things, just your name and address is great.
Yeah, and if you have moved somewhere recently, you wouldn't know maybe.
Yeah.
And so you could let me know if there is somebody in my area already.
And I love that because every so often people, even street leaders, move or disappear and we don't always know about it. So if you tell me, well, I moved from this area where I had a mapped neighborhood to Battle Point and who's my street leader, and then I can find out that, oh, that's not the street leader anymore. I mean, it helps me keep all my information updated, so.
So if I contact you and you tell me, here's the contact information for my street leader, then I can just make that connection. What if there isn't anything organized in my neighborhood and I'm not sure if I want to do the organizing?
Yeah, that's common and it's really not a problem. First of all, if I tell you there is somebody in your neighborhood and they're not there, I want to hear back from you. If you want to have a neighborhood meeting and you know that your neighborhood has not been mapped with the city, I need the street names and the house numbers of the area that you want to include in your neighborhood. And I don't need all the information about the people. I don't need to know anything about them for what I'm doing. Then I ask you to pick a date. And We do trainings 7 days a week, pretty much whenever you want them. Although the typical times are weekdays, it's usually 6-ish. I mean, anywhere from 5 to 8, it's up to you. And on weekends, typically 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And I have a list of people that have all been trained, and I've watched most of them do trainings, and they've watched me do trainings. And we all screw up sometimes, but on the other hand, we're all 98% wonderful. So.
Well, and what you said, the key part of basically knowing who your neighbors are means that you're not ice breaking in the middle of an emergency. You're kind of have some idea about who they might be, which is valuable in and of itself, regardless. I mean, the more you know about like who might have a generator, who might have carpentry skills, who might love to drive a 4-wheel drive, those things are helpful.
Yes, they are. And even if you just want a cup of sugar, the traditional thing, I mean, almost nobody really wants to knock on a door where they have no idea who's there. I've done it. I did it in a snowstorm to meet some neighbors that I hadn't met. And they all took pity and let me in, and it was fine. But it's so much easier if you have an idea of who your neighbors are.
Now, some of these neighborhoods are apartment buildings.
Yep.
And so they're organized based on the fact they share a roof and common walls.
Yep.
Some are in part of a neighborhood. You have a bigger neighborhood, let's say like Northtown Woods or Wing Point, where there might be, you have to kind of arbitrarily divide up where you're going to make the neighbor. How many households do you generally think is the range of a neighborhood?
Well, if you're in one building, it's easier to have more. But generally, I like to see a neighborhood of about 10 houses. And if you're in one of those areas with really long streets where, you have to take 5 minutes to walk from your house to up the driveway, across the road, then obviously you want a smaller neighborhood. But geographic boundaries often have a lot to do with it.
So somewhere between 10 and maybe 15 at the outside is, then you have enough people that you kind of know who they are, and after a disaster, you can check on them without it taking you too far afield.
Yeah, but like my neighborhood, it has around 150 houses, and so we have, I don't know, probably 8 streets and 2 or 3 street leaders for each street. Like my street is 26 houses, and we actually have 3 street leaders because some of the houses are pretty spread apart. And if you don't want to be the street leader, that's cool. I mean, a lot of people don't want to do it, but the key is to talk to a few people in person, have the kickoff meeting, and then after the kickoff meeting is pretty much over, the person whose house is in, or I'll say, well, okay, I know, Ian, that you are too busy to be the street leader. Are there 2 or 3 other people that could work together to do this neighborhood?
And what does the job of a street leader entail?
Well, the email that Ann Lesage has us send out involves keeping your neighborhood updated, trying to go to some of the quarterly street leader meetings that she has, and she does a wonderful job. And if you can't make them, she sends out notes afterwards. There are 2 by Zoom and 2 outside. I think the next one is July 12th. But she also asks that you try to have at least one social gathering. We have a huge full neighborhood block party because we have a zillion people, and then I also have a party in my yard, and I am not a major party giver. It's like there's no linen. I do
Right.
a blast through Costco. I get as much as I can. I bring it home. I put it out on the picnic table. I invite everybody, friends, relatives, whoever's around, and some people show up and some people don't. But every year I meet some different people.
And you, at that party, you have a little sign in or something? Or do you just say, nice to see you?
Well, I usually know who I've emailed.
Right.
So I'll ask them their name and where they live and try to, keep track of them, tell them that I'm trying to keep track of them. And it's really important. I mean, a lot of people are pretty sensitive about sharing some kinds of information, but I do make a point of looking at other people, like if they're limping or using a walker, or they tell me they can't come because they're having mobility problems, I'll go talk to them in person. And I know like who has what diseases, who's on an insulin pump, who's had knee surgery and things like that. And my own husband has memory problems, and I think it's important to share some of that information, because if I were traveling and the earthquake happened when I was gone, I know that he would not manage all that well by himself. And the purpose is to help people. It's not to try to delve into everything about their lives.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard is that material generally, like information about somebody who might be, primarily spending time in bed or not able to easily get out of a chair or have memory issues, is not material that gets transmitted up to City Hall.
None of this information goes to the city.
So it's more just that you're telling those 10 households. And so it's still relatively confidential.
Yes, it is. It doesn't go to any other street leaders. It's kept within the immediate unit, particularly sensitive information. Nothing at all goes to the city. They're in the process. Pascal, who's the computer wizard at Bainbridge Prepares, is working on a database that would allow the whole island, if they wanted to have their information stored on that. And he's good at security and all that, but each neighborhood unit would still only have access to their own information. Like I said, I'm on Agate Loop, and I think we have around 142 houses. And there are 3 of us that co-lead. So the 3 of us have access to all the information, but the other street captains on my road only have access to the 8 houses that they're primarily responsible, and limited access to the whole street.
So the advantage of having this kind of organization is that besides just community solidarity, is in the event of a disaster, while we're in that 4-week period, we know that we can work together as little Cub Scout patrols or whatever to kind of manage getting through what's going on without having to go to the fire department, which won't be available, or if they're available, they'll be very, very, very busy.
Yeah, no, the first thing the fire department will do is a damage assessment, and they won't be stopping to help anybody.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. You talk about data collection of the residents of the island. What about data for the residents about these resources and how many of these employees from the fire department and the city, the police, all of these folks who live off island and aren't going to be here during the emergency? Is there a way to actually share that information with the residents to say 50% of our police department doesn't live on the island.
Okay, yeah, so we do have these cards, which Ann brought, which if you're watching this on YouTube now or later, they're at the front desk at the senior center and you can pick them up, and they are a series of computer URLs, internet addresses for some of the resources. If I've got your question right, you're wondering about information in a disaster going out to the communities about what our capacity
I
is?
think a lot of people, I've been to the Prepares 2 or 3 day events several times, and I came from California, so I have gone through earthquakes as well and had kits in my car and that source. But I think a lot of people are very complacent. They don't have the information. They kind of want to live in denial. And I think if people realize that they have to fend for themselves for 4 weeks, food, water, shelter. We're neighbors. We live in 1950 houses. We have been told by the earthquake people that our houses are not connected to the foundation. So it's very likely we won't be able to live in our houses.
Yeah. They'll be
And
walking
so
out.
are we going to live in tents in the backyard? Are we going to move in with the neighbors across the street who have the big houses that were built much later?
It's a good reason to be friends with your neighbor. But
I mean, we have 2 streets that we could decide to map our neighborhood. One is with older houses and one is with the big houses across. So, it's kind of like how you share those resources. And then, it's many people live in complacency and they don't really want. So I think sharing information about the fact that the city doesn't, like, that's one of the things the Prepares people said, is we're not going to come rescue you.
well, that's the way I start out a kickoff meeting. And that's the way Luke Carpenter, who was one of the old deputy fire chiefs, used to start it out. It's like, okay, if we have a disaster, what are you going to do? And somebody will always say, call 911. And his response is, they're not coming. And I live on the island and they're not coming to me either.
Right.
And he'll go through the number of fire and police that are actually on duty on the island at any one time, which can be very minimal. I mean, police can be 2 or 3.
Yeah, and well, that's one of the reasons we're talking today. And one of the reasons why that idea of organizing your neighborhood, even if you don't have, ideally, this is part of a step that will also lead you to do things like think about how I'm going to get water and organize my requirements. We have a couple of, also Ann brought by some emergency supply lists. I'm sure you already have these, but we have them at the center if you want to kind of get a checklist of what it is that you might need. And I don't know, you've probably seen these too. Prepare in a year.
I think they had those at the city preparedness.
Yeah. And the challenge obviously is just getting started. And so, we do have some tools like our little ever-present phones that you can make a reminder to yourself to go shopping and kind of work through this, because any step is better than no step. And I feel like the strongest connection is going to be between those neighbors to try to help solve the problem after the crisis. And because we can't, I suppose there are, survivalist types who figure they want to do it all on their own. But I don't feel like that kind of maps with our experience of what happens after disasters, nor is it in the spirit that I think this island has.
Well, we need to, no matter how prepared you are, you cannot cover every single base. You just can't. I can do a lot of things, but I don't run a chainsaw really well anymore. And I don't want to go buy stuff if my next door neighbor has it. So yes, but if we were having a regular planned kickoff meeting, we would start off with, you are going to be on your own. And the main recommendation is to shelter in place if you can. and know where your nearest hub is. The hub is though for first aid information sharing and trading resources. Like if somebody has 3 extra bedrooms and there's a family that is in a mobile or something that left its foundation and they can't live there, it's not going to be a place where you wander in and say, well, here I am, help me. I mean, the time to get prepared is now. And even if we don't have an earthquake, the last time we had a 3-day snowstorm, I had neighbors who didn't have heat and couldn't go grocery shopping. And yeah, they all got taken care of, but I was kind of like, yay, I don't have to wipe the shelves clear of bananas. I've got food, I've got water, I've got a 4-wheel drive car, and I'm staying home.
Yeah, and I feel like that's there are people who are going to get stuck at home. We in the senior community center know with our friends at Island Volunteer Caregivers of people who either don't drive or don't drive well, are elderly, and their family doesn't live here and they live by themselves. And if the phones go out and the power goes out, they don't have any way to let anybody know that they're in dire straits. Whereas if you have a neighborhood, you can say, well, I'm just going to go check up on June or Jerry and see if everything's okay, because I've knocked on their door before.
Yeah.
So if we talked about this beforehand, Ann, but I know that the senior center, I'm happy to work with people if they don't have a place to meet. If there isn't an area in their neighborhood and they want to hold a map your neighborhood kickoff, we can arrange to try to find a time and place here. And you were saying that the fire stations often also have spaces.
Yes, I've given presentations here, actually, to neighborhoods as well as Fire Station 21 and 23. Those have to go through Ann Lesage, but if anybody emails me about anything, I either know the answer because somebody else asked it, or I'll find out. So we can take care of meeting places, we can take care of materials, we can find trainers. I just need to know how many households, where you are, so that we can indicate your neighborhood as mapped on the city's island-wide map. And, we'll take care of it. We'll even help persuade people to be captains. Because it's not a job that any one person should do, really, because most of us travel or have our other times.
It's a good one to share.
It's absolutely imperative, I think, to share.
And it sounds like it's not onerous. I mean, it involves a couple of, a commitment to a few meetings, and then just being willing to be the point person to say we should, anybody here have a backyard big enough for us to get together in?
Yeah, probably the most work is just in the beginning, getting everything pulled together for the neighborhood kickoff meeting, and then finding out about your neighbors. Like, you want to know who the doctors, nurses, electricians, construction workers, whatever are in your neighborhood, so that you know you've got people that can back you up. But the rule of thumb is a gallon of water per person per day, and that includes pets. Well, I look at my cats and I think, come on, guys, how could you possibly drink a gallon of water? But
well, maybe they'll share with you.
Maybe they might. And food, I've gotten friends on base to take me out to the base and buy MREs, the meals that are ready to eat. I haven't gotten around to tasting one, but some neighborhoods have done their annual party by bringing something from your stash and seeing if it's edible. I think they have good desserts afterwards,
The freeze-dried stuff
Yeah,
that you wonder about.
yeah.
but.
How much freeze-dried food can you eat?
Yeah, you don't want to add water, though. You don't want to give up your water. Has to be the bottom.
Well, the water for cooking is actually counted in that gallon of water per day. But if you go for all pasta, all dried beans, all rice, you probably would need a little more water. And there's now a team, I mean, Bainbridge Prepares has, at last count, I knew, something like 26 different teams. There's a team of ham radio operators or amateur radio operators. There's big wheels, the guys that have the Gigundo trucks and are willing to come rescue you. I volunteered here at a warming shelter and got a ride because I didn't feel like testing it out. I drove all over Alaska, but their snow is like sand here. It's right at freezing. It's very slippery.
Right, it's very slick.
Shouldn't drive. But there's also a water resources team, which I think is the newest team, and they're dedicated to helping people figure out, and communities figure out ways to get communal water resources. And they can show you that your hot water tank probably has a faucet at the bottom and that you want to turn off your water immediately so that it doesn't get contaminated, but then you can use the water in the hot water tank. There's filters, there's boiling, there's life straws. When I started getting prepared, I literally kept track of everything I did all day long and thought, okay, how would I do this without water, electricity, and heat? And I have an advantage. I lived in a log cabin for 3 years with no water, no electricity, and a wood stove. It's like, okay, plan A for heat is that my heat pump will work. Plan B is that if it doesn't work, I've got a propane fireplace that gives off a lot of heat. Plan C is if there's an earthquake and the propane tank is not usable, then I have an indoor rated kerosene stove for heat. And they use those in Japan and they're very safe and no odors. So I try to think of everything in multiple ways. Okay, how am I going to do this if I have light? Where is my crank flashlight, my crank radio? I have a battery backup on my amateur radio so I can keep talking when the power goes out. We have a generator. And it didn't happen overnight. It's been a work in process since forever. And I have my own theory of being prepared, magical thinking.
Oh, good. Magical
Yes.
thinking. I like this.
Yes, it's where if I am really prepared, then the disaster won't happen. It keeps motivating me to get more and more prepared.
And if we all do it, it makes it less likely yet.
Yes, that's my theory and I'm sticking to it.
Anita, do you have a question or are you good? Okay.
Hi, whoops here. No, I'm good. Is this very interesting? Thank you. As you know, I live in Harbor Square Loop, and I now I have some questions to ask them. I do have a feeling they might be mapped because I went to a CPR class for the residents, and that was very interesting, and it was geared toward residents on Bainbridge. So I'm hoping that, yes, they may already have a start on this mapping your neighborhood. But thank you. I find this very interesting because, moving over here from Seattle and and preparations over here are a little different than over there. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you can email me if you want, and I'll double check Harbor Square. I imagine it is mapped, but I don't know off the top of my head. Usually the biggest problems in the condominiums and apartments is a place to store the stuff that you need to have on hand, and that can be managed in different ways.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do either of you have any immediate questions or?
We have this map from prior friend of mine who lives in a map area near me.
Right?
Sent me some, I guess, some maps.
So this is a map of a mapped neighborhood.
West Winslow area, and
Okay.
it's where we live, which shows that we're not, but I'm wondering if, do these get updated regularly so we can know who has and hasn't mapped?
They don't get updated that regularly, but the map that I have access to was updated in July of last year, and there should be a new update coming out fairly soon.
So my neighborhood just had a list of people and addresses. I didn't ever get a map like that. Or is this common now that they're making maps? Oh,
Yeah,
good.
it's one of the steps
That you're requiring. Okay, so there's a little map that puts a name with an address.
yeah, there's a map your neighborhood response plan. And one of the most important reasons to have this is after there's a disaster, you can put an okay or help sign on your window. And if there's no sign, then somebody will show up to check and try to figure out if the house is occupied. This is what we go through at the actual kickoff meetings, which gives you a series of goals and a timeline, the most important steps to take care of immediately.
Does everybody get one of those at the meeting?
Everybody gets one of these at the meeting, and we recommend that you have a box under your bed with this, a couple Band-Aids, a hard helmet or a bike helmet.
My husband thinks I'm crazy, but I put hard hat under my.
Good.
Yeah, and some shoes right there.
Sturdy shoes.
Yeah.
Well, we don't know.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat here. Ann Cook, one word, no E's, at BainbridgePrepares.org. Find out more.